I'm George Norrie. Welcome to Coast AM. Are you a targeted individual? Well, you're going to hear from one. You're going to find out exactly what it means. What happened, Michael? Tell us your story.
Well, what happened in the very beginning was I had a normal life, pretty much like anybody else would. And then in about 2005, approximately 8 years ago, I began experiencing unusual happenings, odd happenings. At first, I really didn't pay much attention to them. Things like furniture being moved around in my apartment. I was like, did I put that there? What's that doing there? And then other small things like damage to my property, to my clothing. Small things, but it's called what is known as small but noticeable damage. And at about the same time, I also noticed, I don't know, just kind of weird things happening. Like, for instance, when I was driving down the street, oncoming traffic would flash their lights at me, blink their lights, or turn their lights on or off. And sometimes that happens, someone will turn their lights on or they'll turn them off, whatever.
Right.
But
that probably depends if you had your brights on. Maybe they thought you didn't have your headlights on, right?
No, this was when I had no lights on during the day.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't specify that. During the day, and some cars do have the lights running all the time, but these were the bright lights usually, and there's a distinction between those two. And I didn't really notice it at first. Then after a while, I began to notice it. And then also, when I was walking on the street, walking to a store or something like that, cars that would pass by me would honk their horn a couple of times. And, I didn't really I never made the connection. I just thought people were honking. People do honk their horns. Then I got these sustained honks when I was the only guy on the street, and I kept saying to myself, what's going on here? What's happening here? It was weird to me. And then also another thing that I noticed, these are all methods of parts of organized stalking or gang stalking. I prefer the word organized stalking. There's many different methods and techniques that are used, and I was experiencing them just by noticing them. And then when I did investigation and research, I said, I went on the internet by myself. Nobody was there to explain. I was by myself living in an apartment in Hollywood, California, as a writer, doing screenwriting, and I would spend weeks at a time in my apartment writing. And when this started happening, I had nowhere else to really turn to. There was no one that had any answers for me. So I went on the internet and I started to explore and putting in keywords, brighting lights, enter, exit. I started entering these things into the searches that I did,
right?
And I got back that these are all symptoms, classic symptoms of being a targeted individual.
When did this all start for you, Michael?
Approximately 2005, very mildly. It kind of blended into my regular life. I really didn't, it wasn't like one day I was getting bombarded and harassed. It evolved very slowly from zero to full power over a course of time, constantly gaining momentum and escalating in terms of the harassment.
The obvious question, Michael, would be why you? Were you an experiment, or were they after you for some specific reason? And we'll get into the who in a second, but
okay.
Why you?
Well, that's a really great question, George. I tried to figure that out a lot of times, and there is no, in my particular case, some targets I understand have had their perpetrators confront them and say, you know why this is happening to you? And they would give them a reason. But for me, there was no answers. And
you probably don't even know who they are.
No, I really don't. That when you asked that question, it really stirred up the question that constantly was the biggest question that all targeted individuals have is why? Why me? What have I done to deserve this?
Which makes me think it's an experiment to see what they can do.
Correct.
Or how far they can push you or manipulate you.
That's absolutely correct.
Roger, how often does this happen to people?
Well, we hear from 4 to 5 individuals daily, new people that are targeted individuals, but not only just from the United States. I just had 2 sets of individuals come in for evaluation from Australia. And I'm hearing people from all the different parts of the world, from Europe, from Middle East. So the main thing to understand is that the intelligence agencies around the world really have shared the technology, and they are all doing experiments in all the different locations of the world to attempt to see what they can do, not only through mind control technology to control the general public, but also to be able to program other people to do tasks like become perpetrators.
In your case, Michael, any idea how they found you?
I really don't. It was such a like the blending from my regular life to this to absolute, to like really. It took a long time for me to realize what was happening to me. I could, I shook it off. I said, this is probably just, I did. At one point, I thought, this has got to be some kind of hoax. Somebody's playing a prank on me. They've gone to some elaborate length to go out of their way to see how I'm going to react to this practical joke. At the lower levels, it almost seemed like it was that, that type of harassment, minor, but still harassment the same from your regular life. All of a sudden you're getting these things happening. They're very disturbing, if they continue to happen. And that's the whole goal of it. So I really don't know exactly when I realized, but it was sometime after it started. When I look back in hindsight, probably it was going on for up to a year and a half to 2 years almost, that things got to the point where I realized that they weren't a coincidence anymore, that these events were happening pretty much almost predictable. And when I got to that point, I said, there is something going on here. Something is orchestrating this, and something is controlling this, and they've singled me out for some reason. And I, to this day, I still don't know why. No one's come forward. That's the biggest puzzle for targets. Nobody ever comes forward and gives them any inkling of an idea of why they've been chosen. Or I'll tell you honestly, I do know some of the motivating factors for some of these people. From what I understand in my research, in my studies, and talking to other targets, some of the purposes some of the reasons for the actual crime being committed are for simple things that are obvious, like hatred, revenge, jealousy, or actually just for sport. For some of these people that are seriously sociopathic or psychotic, these are vents for them.
Michael, I'm going to ask you a question that some may deem conspiratorial, but a lot of people have always theorized with these mass shootings that the individual may have been mind-controlled to do what they did. Well, do you think that's a possibility?
Oh, definitely. Without question. Roger and I have talked about this before, especially with this very disturbing outbreak of school shootings.
Yes.
There's definitely something at work here that is very evil. And this is not a natural. Sometimes you do once in a while have somebody who goes,
berserk. Sure. And I think the pharmaceutical drugs might have something to do with it too.
That's a possibility too.
Yeah.
They might be having an adverse reaction. I don't know, but I do know that what you said before. I can go back as early as the 1960s. Robert Kennedy's assassin, I believe Sirhan,
Right.
when he shot Robert Kennedy, it took 6 Secret Service men to take the gun out of his hand.
Yeah, and he was a little person.
And he was a little person. He was seriously at that point, and now it's coming out. More and more comes out in the future. They look back and they say, yes, he was most definitely, most likely a mind control victim.
Do you see much of that, Roger?
Well, especially, George, with people that have the voice-to-skull technology where they actually have voices in their heads that are giving them instructions. Normally, once the voices start, they're just derogatory and insulting and negative. But eventually what happens is as time goes on and the person gets worn down because they start losing sleep, once you have voices in your head, it's very difficult for you to get a normal full night's sleep. And so once you get into the sleep deprivation, you become more worn down.
That's right.
Then what happens is the voices start asking you to do things, oddball things. They send you on tasks, and eventually I've had clients where the voices have told them to kill neighbors, to do violence to other people. So one of the things that I've noted with these things, with people where it gets progressively more serious, is when the voices start to give these people instructions. And you remember a few years ago we were commenting on that woman that drowned her 2 children.
Yeah, I remember that.
Down south. We were suspecting that she had been influenced by this kind of technology, and then we found out her husband had been involved with NASA. So there was a government link on that story.
Well, the first thing we hear, Roger, and I'm sure you have too, when people say, well, I'm hearing voices in my head and stuff, I guess the first thing you say is maybe this person is having a mental issue of some type, right?
Well, I have to keep an open mind because normally by the time somebody comes to me, they've already been incarcerated in hospitals for evaluations, as what happened with Michael, and he can talk.
We'll get into
that experience as well. But normally, what happens is they hold you. They can hold you for 72 hours just for evaluation to make sure you're not a danger to yourself or anybody else. But once they normally do is they'll load you on the psych meds, and that gets you down to being somewhat of a vegetable where you really can't deal with your own life. You actually have to be in a lockup where they're going to conduct your life for you. And the people that I see are people that have finally escaped that life because they were so drugged out that they were unable to do anything, and luckily some of them managed to get out of that situation. And that's when they come to me saying, I don't any more want to be a vegetable based on these psych med treatments.
Mike and Roger, very quickly, tell us about this skull technology.
Yeah, the voice-to-skull technology is based on a whole litany of patents. In other words, the original Stalking patent was a 1990s patent where he used pulse microwaves to put voices and other information in people's heads. And then after that, all the patents to deal with that subject matter went secret. They went into top secret, and the government decided to go forward and see if they could use their top scientists to be able to get the technology not just for use with people who are deaf, and here you're doing something beneficial for deaf people, enabling them to hear because you're going directly from microwaves into the neural centers of the brain. But they decided that this could end up being a terrific battlefield weapon because if you can jam the brains of your enemies or your dissidents, then you can control populations without having to blow cities up. You don't need to destroy the infrastructures. You don't have to bomb a city into compliance. You just turn on your machines and cause people's heads to get jammed with voices that are so distracting that they can't think.